Imagine it's 1959. You're a soldier, living in an army barracks with 200 others. Life seems routine: a church, a hospital, your living quarters. Each day, you head to the plant where your colleagues conduct various experiments. On the surface, nothing seems unusual. But then, a chilling realization sets in: there's no daylight, and it's intensely cold. The electricity humming through the walls is powered by a portable nuclear reactor. Your drinking water is harvested from a glacier. This entire army barracks is hidden deep underground, in the heart of the Arctic. What we're about to reveal was once classified as top secret, until now. Our own discovery of this place began unexpectedly. While sifting through archival materials and documents, we stumbled upon a simple cardboard box labeled Camp Century. Intrigued, we asked our researcher, "What is this?" The true purpose of this underground city, it turned out, extended far beyond mere housing. To the world, it was known as Camp Century, but to the U.S. military, it held a far more ominous name. One veteran, recalling his arrival in April 1962, described stepping off the plane into a brutal -50°C with blowing snow, feeling immense relief as he was led down into the tunnels. The interior was startling. Welcome to Project Iceworm, the atomic city carved beneath the ice. Some places on Earth seem utterly inhospitable to humanity, and the Arctic is undeniably one of them. In the far north of Greenland, the world's northernmost country, temperatures plummet to an astonishing -50°C. An immense ice sheet, over 3 kilometers thick, blankets 80% of the land. To visualize this, imagine the entire city of New York submerged beneath ice of that height. During winter, the polar night stretches for weeks, even months, bringing oppressive, icy darkness. Blizzards frequently sweep across the region at speeds of 72 kilometers per hour, and then there are whiteouts, extreme blizzards that envelop everything in a dense, disorienting blanket of fog, snow, and wind, until all you can see is an endless expanse of white. It was in this unforgiving environment that America chose to build a city. And this was merely a prototype, the initial step in what was envisioned as an entire network of cities and bases, covering an area 3 times the size of Denmark. Why on earth would they choose such a location? America's fascination with Greenland spans decades. In 1946, the U.S. offered to purchase Greenland from Denmark, recognizing its immense strategic significance. Denmark, however, declined, famously stating, "We may owe a lot to the Americans, but I don't think we owe them the entire island of Greenland." The country even made headlines more recently, in early 2025, when then-President Trump reiterated his desire to acquire it, citing national security. Danish officials, however, firmly dismissed the idea, emphasizing Greenland's 800-year history as part of the Danish kingdom. Greenland has always been geopolitically crucial. A quick look at a map reveals why. It sits almost directly between the United States and Russia, 2 nations historically bound by a rather icy relationship. Instead of a purchase, a defense agreement between the U.S. and Denmark came into effect in 1951, permitting the U.S. to establish military bases in Greenland. Thule Air Base, a significant military installation, was set up that very year. In the 1950s, the U.S. was arguably not just great, but also incredibly paranoid and prepared to invest billions to maintain its technological edge. In that era, one could not simply afford to passively observe technological advancements. Let's return to the 1950s, an era of housewives, rock and roll, Hollywood's golden age, and the looming shadow of the Cold War. The 1950s were a period of immense economic prosperity in America, fueled by a post-war boom. The nation emerged as a global superpower with ample resources. Across the globe, the USSR presented a starkly different vision, marked by rapid industrialization, urbanization, and the nascent stages of the space race. It was a subtle, persistent sound that ultimately spurred America to construct Camp Century, a series of faint beeps that forever altered human civilization. These sounds emanated from Sputnik, the first human-made object to orbit Earth. Across America, anyone with a shortwave radio could tune in and hear those signals from a satellite soaring high above. Naturally, the U.S. military grew concerned the Soviet Union might arm such satellites with missiles. This escalating fear compelled the army to propose an unprecedented new base, an entire city beneath the Arctic ice, strategically close to Soviet territory. This project would extend far beyond Thule Air Base, pushing the boundaries of anything previously conceived. This initiative unfolded during the early stages of the Cold War, as the United States implemented its polar or Arctic strategy. To the outside world, it was presented as Camp Century, a pioneering research station in one of Earth's most isolated regions. The narrative was that America possessed the ingenuity to build anywhere, transforming even the most brutal environments into habitable spaces, or at least, that's what the press was told. Journalists from publications like National Geographic were even invited to tour its labyrinthine tunnels and subterranean structures. One expert noted that Camp Century was far from secret. It was, in fact, a publicity stunt by the U.S. Army, portraying it as an exciting adventure in Arctic construction. Yet, even within the Army, its true purpose remained a strictly need-to-know secret, withheld from most of the soldiers stationed there. Dr. Robert Weiss, a physician at Camp Century in 1963, recounted his surprise. "I didn't realize I was going to go to Greenland. I remember meeting the colonel, and he told me, within a week, you will be flying to Camp Century, Greenland, 1,287 kilometers from the North Pole." I looked at him and said, "You're kidding me." For him, it was an unexpected adventure. The official Army claim was that this unusual outpost would be used for glaciology, climate studies, and research into human survival in extreme cold. However, while Americans had broad operational freedom within designated defense areas like Thule Air Base, operating outside these zones required Danish permission. Consequently, when the U.S. sought approval for Camp Century, they were less than transparent about its actual intent. Now, decades later, those files have been declassified, allowing us to finally share its true purpose. This was Project Iceworm. The plan was to conceal over 600 nuclear missiles within a vast tunnel network, an area 3 times the size of Denmark. These mobile missiles, hidden deep beneath the ice, would be virtually undetectable and indestructible in a Soviet first strike. The Danish government, understanding the inevitability of the project, adopted a strategy to downplay its military significance. One individual stated, "I did not know Iceworm. I did not know any plans to put nuclear missiles in there." It was an audacious concept, made even more astonishing by how close the Americans came to realizing it, given that constructing anything in this environment is almost impossible. Camp Century became the world's first permanent base constructed beneath glacial ice. Imagine the logistical nightmare: no hardware stores, no shops, no highways, no airports. Every single item had to be shipped from thousands of kilometers away to Thule Air Base, a treacherous journey across unpredictable, icy seas. Thule itself was only accessible during the brief summer window when the Arctic sea ice receded sufficiently for ships to dock. Project Iceworm's ultimate location lay 204 kilometers further inland. That's a distance comparable to traveling from New York to Philadelphia, with a quarter of the journey still remaining. Food, fuel, and equipment were laboriously dragged on sleds in convoys. They employed heavy swings, tractor-pulled sled trains, to transport materials, equipment, and personnel, often taking 3 to 4 days to traverse the entire Camp Century Trail. A temporary over-snow supply route, known as the Ice Cap Trail, was meticulously prepared and maintained between Thule and Camp Century. Engineers battled deep crevasses, extreme cold, and constantly shifting ice. At the end of this immense journey, they arrived, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Before any structures could be built, the tunnels themselves had to be excavated. Construction of the camp unfolded rapidly over 2 summers, in 1959 and 1960. Due to the unforgiving weather, workers operated virtually 24 hours a day to complete the tunnels. Engineers utilized a cut-and-cover method to carve them out beneath the snow. First, massive trenches were dug using Swiss-made snow milling machines called Peter plows. Originally designed for clearing roads in the Swiss Alps, these remarkable machines could move up to 594 cubic meters of snow every hour. The excavated snow was then pushed out of the tunnels to condense. Plowed snow, being denser and heavier than regular snow, was ideal for construction. Curved metal sheets were then positioned overhead, and snow was piled on top, effectively concealing the tunnels below. Prefabricated structures were assembled on stilts within these tunnels, a design that minimized heat transfer and kept the interiors warm. Construction crews could erect each building in about a day. Piece by piece, an entire underground town took shape. Tunnels were bored into the ice, featuring a main street from which living quarters, latrines, generators, the mess hall, and other facilities branched off. The level of cutting-edge engineering required just to make this place habitable was truly astounding. The primary challenge at Camp Century was not, in fact, keeping warm, but rather keeping everything cold. An elaborate ventilation system drew frigid surface air into the tunnels, circulating it before expelling it back to the surface. The tunnel air had to be meticulously maintained at -15 degrees Celsius, any warmer, and the ice infrastructure would begin to melt. This proved to be a significant problem. With machinery operating and men working, considerable heat was generated within the tunnels, and dissipating it was difficult. Imagine the ice turning slushy, making movement and driving within the tunnels arduous, and destabilizing the entire structure. This unforeseen issue necessitated the installation of massive ventilation systems solely to extract the heat. To circumvent the almost impossible task of ensuring a continuous supply of diesel for generators, power was instead provided by a portable nuclear reactor, the first of its kind. This modular reactor, approximately 1.5 megawatts in capacity, could be transported to the base in smaller components and then assembled on site. The concept was to achieve energy independence in extreme and remote environments. As the first nuclear reactor on Danish soil, its presence caused considerable concern within the Danish government, as there were no existing regulations or clear protocols for its control, nor any framework for assigning responsibility in the event of an accident. Perhaps the most ingenious, and unsettling, aspect of the camp was its water supply, a solution devised by the base's engineer, Raul Rodriguez. A hole was bored 150 meters deep, the height of a typical skyscraper. A heating element was then lowered into the ice, melting it to create a reservoir of over 37,000 liters of potable water. To combat the pervasive boredom, men would occasionally take turns rappelling into the enormous, dark cavern of the well for a thrill. Boredom, in fact, was a significant challenge. Despite the amenities designed to replicate home, there was little to do, and the profound isolation deeply affected many. Officers would often quip, "Never have so many gotten up so early to do so little for so long." Dr. Weiss found ways to keep busy. "I learned to like that type of life. As a physician, I probably had less work than the enlisted men building things out on the snow cap. I had time to play bridge, chess, listen to music. Every morning, I would quote Voltaire, 'This is the best of all possible worlds.'" Officers' quarters were simply partitioned by hanging blankets. The kitchens, however, were excellent, providing an estimated 8,000 calories per man per day. The only scarcity was fresh vegetables. A watermelon was considered a rare luxury. Everyone had their assigned role, and the site effectively functioned as a small, self-contained town. The camp commander oversaw construction, ensuring everything was up to standard, supported by expert electricians and plumbers. Beyond its role as a secret pilot program for nuclear missiles, the base also served as a vast psychological experiment. The army sought to determine if men could endure life in this isolated ice town, far from civilization, without succumbing to the pressures of extreme isolation. The U.S. government was particularly keen on this research as it prepared to send the first humans into space. Dr. Weiss recalled, "All I knew was that one of the basic reasons for the camp was to see if people could live in this type of environment. Most of it was just white, endless snow. You wouldn't see a mountain or anything else, just barren snow. The reasoning was clear: if men could operate in such difficult and harsh conditions, a base on the moon seemed within reach. More extreme psychological experiments also took place, including semi-voluntary hunger experiments where men had limited food for several days, to study the effects on personnel. To all extents and purposes, these psychological tests were deemed successful. There were no reported fights or revolts. The men lived in a peaceful and orderly fashion. The conclusion was that the Camp Century concept was, indeed, feasible. Had the entire project been as successful as these psychological experiments, hundreds of kilometers of additional tunnels would have been excavated, rail tracks laid, and over 600 missile silos prepared. But it was not successful. Engineer Raul Rodriguez, despite his brilliance, underestimated the rapid movement of the surrounding ice sheet. Soldiers were constantly battling the encroaching ice with chainsaws, but their efforts were futile. Over time, the ice deformed and shifted, causing tunnels to warp, collapse, and become structurally unsound. There was simply no stable environment for an atomic reactor, let alone 600 missiles. The reactor was taken offline in 1963, and just 3 years later, the base was abandoned. By 1969, it was a total ruin. Steel structures had buckled, wooden beams had splintered, and the ice swiftly reclaimed almost everything. As Cold War military technology advanced, systems like submarine-launched ballistic missiles and ICBMs rendered Project Iceworm obsolete. Ultimately, maintaining Camp Century proved too expensive for its limited scientific and military returns. The U.S. Army determined it was no longer cost-effective to continuously repair tunnels and supply personnel. And that, it seemed, was the end of the story. Camp Century remains a startling testament to Cold War excess, showcasing the immense resources the U.S. government was willing to commit to truly bizarre concepts. Its scope was almost science fiction, an idea that would be unfathomable today. Yet, that wasn't the end of its story. Not even close. While Project Iceworm's soldiers were preoccupied with their atomic reactor and psychological experiments, they were also engaged in another activity: drilling. No one in the Army foresaw its significance, but scientists at the base drilled a hole through nearly 1,390 meters of ice, reaching Greenland's ancient bedrock. They collected samples, which then sat untouched in jars for decades. Geoscientist Paul Biermann later discovered these frozen samples in Denmark. He and his colleagues at the University of Vermont studied them, arriving at a disturbing conclusion with global ramifications. Until 2019, scientists had believed Greenland's enormous ice sheet was several million years old. The samples revealed it was much, much younger. This means Greenland is far more susceptible to changes in Earth's climate than previously thought. Should global temperatures continue to rise and the climate warm, a greater portion of this immense ice sheet would melt into the ocean, leading to significant sea level rise and potentially disrupting the vitally important North Atlantic current. Camp Century itself was lost decades ago, the ice shifting and crushing the abandoned steel and wood structures. Nature reclaimed it, until an unexpected event brought it back to the surface. In April 2024, NASA scientist Chad Green flew over Greenland to map ice sheets and project future sea level rise. To his astonishment, his radar picked up something else entirely: the distinct, though crushed and distorted, tunnels of Camp Century. As strange as it sounds, this is only the most recent rediscovery. In 2016, the camp was also found, and that time, the Danish authorities learned something deeply troubling. When the Americans abandoned the base in 1967, they left behind toxic radioactive waste. At the time, the Danes permitted it to remain, deeming the levels below alarming thresholds. However, the ice is now melting faster than anticipated. This toxic waste, once believed to be buried forever, could resurface. Estimates suggest that in approximately 70 to 100 years, meltwater will begin to expose the buried biological, chemical, and radiological waste at Camp Century. Some of this waste could then be carried into the ocean, sparking a significant debate in Denmark. According to the 1951 treaty, Denmark is legally responsible for cleaning up after U.S. military operations, meaning the Americans bear no legal obligation. However, a strong argument exists for a moral responsibility. Currently, safely removing the waste is neither technically nor economically feasible, yet inaction could become increasingly dangerous over time. Decades later, Camp Century stands, albeit in ruins, simultaneously as a wild fantasy, a frightening reality, and a tantalizing mystery. There is still much we don't know about Project Iceworm, who exactly was behind it, and how was it discussed and received within different parts of the army and political circles. Unanticipated by all involved, its legacy is now profoundly intertwined with the planet's own uncertain future.